everybody. This is John Craig,
And
and
this is
that
Sandi.
is, and we are here with you again live on this evenings for Walking in Spirit and Truth. And so, as you all are joining us, those are picking us up on the archive. We sure appreciate it, and just want to let you know that if you need to get in contact with us, you can go to our website where we have a lot of different information, including our events that are coming up. And but you can on there you'll see our email, and you can email us at LOW. I'll set it up here on the screen here shortly, but LOW at lifeofworshipamarillo.org, or our website is www.lifeofworshipamarillo, all one word, .org. So anyway, I'll let Sandi tell you about our plans for Sukkot coming up. We're gonna have a good time. We just had a great time at Shavuot, so I can't wait for Sukkot.
Yes, just to let you know, you're welcome to join us for Unmovable Sukkot, and that is
October 9th through the 16th.
And you're welcome to join us at Lake Paladura in Spearman, Texas. We had an amazing time last year with people from all over the U.S. and great speakers, and we expect God to do amazing things this year as well. Anyway, so if you want more information, you can either contact us, email, or you can get on the website and look at it there. But let's get to our subject. We are one more week talking about Psalm 23, verse 5. And we have been breaking apart the different words. Last week, we discussed what the preparation was, that Yah prepared this table before us in our faces so that we could see and experience his miracle power and all he's doing for us. And that he takes care of us no matter who's around us, no matter what enemy might be trying to get into our lives. He's not threatened by him. Of course he's not. He's Yah, and he takes care of us. But we're going to delve into this a little bit deeper and then go look at this from a completely different angle. So I want you guys to stay tuned, bear with us on that, because remember, when we read something in the Torah, when we read something in the Word from Genesis to Revelation, it can have many layers of meaning. And so does that change with this? I don't think so. I think it's the same, many layers of meaning. So let's get started by reading the scripture. Let's go ahead and read all of Psalm 23. And so if you guys will turn with us, that would be amazing.
All right. So Psalm 23, a psalm of David. Yahweh is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou hast prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of Yahweh forever.
All right. So let's head back to verse 5. And as I said just a few minutes ago, that prepare, to ordain, to put in order, to lay out, to set in a row, that's what that word means. And it shows us that Yah's preparation is intentional and planned and orderly, and he's got everything under control. That's what we want. We want him under control, so we don't have to worry about it. Remember, he says that we're supposed to cast our burdens upon him. He's got us. He's going to take care of us. He gives us that provision in lavish form, right in the midst of our troubles, right in the midst of what we're dealing with, whether it is we are needed comfort or rest or friends or shalom, or we need something done with our business, our salary, whatever it is, whatever kind of provision is needed, he's going to take care of us, because he is a miracle working Yah, and he gives us that hope. He gives us that assurity that he is there. Now, when we continue to look at shalach, it also means to shoot forth, grow long, reach forth, sow, spread, stretch forth. Now, shalach, remember what our word for table is? Well, the root there is that shalach, okay? Because the word for table is shulchan. So when we're looking at shalach, this idea, when you get this picture, to shoot forth, grow, reach, forth, sow, spread, stretch forth. And we're talking about a table. When we think of table, now I said we're going to look at it a little differently, but we talked about the tablelands last week and how Yah has prepared a high table, a table that's set apart from others, because we are the special guests there. And he is Yah. He is the one that's prepared it for us. So here we have this idea of a table. And when you think of a long table like that, you also think of a feast. So now we have a high, long table, which is amazing, that it's stocked and piled high with those things that we need, at especially the time we need them. And he does it where? How? In front of our enemies. Now, who is our enemy? Who is our enemy? Is the enemy the one we hear on the news? Is our enemy the government? I'll let you think about that one. Is our enemy the world system? Is our enemy the one who stands against us with a sword in his hand? Is our enemy the one who's concealing something in his bag that we don't even know about? Is our enemy the one, somebody who has a finger on the trigger? Is it the one who threatens our family? Who is our enemy? Is it the one that lives with us? Is it the one that is competing with us for something else? Who is our enemy? Where does it point to? Is it somebody threatening your job? Is somebody threatening your family, your finances? See, when Yeshua prepares his table, he actually sat at a table with his enemy. Who was that enemy? It was Judas, who was thought to be a friend, but he was also an enemy. Or does the word enemy point us in a completely different direction? We're going to dwell more on this at a later time, but we're going to just briefly talk about it here as well, because the word enemy means adversary. It can also mean to be in affliction, besiege, bind up, in distress, oppress, enemy, pangs, to be in a strait or in trouble. All of these things can signify an enemy. Okay, so that almost shows us that an enemy can be inside and outside. Maybe we need to think about that. It's much more than just this figurehead that's outside the door that seems to be the boogeyman, or Hasatan himself. No, our enemies out there seem to be much more vast, especially the closer you get to Yah, the more attack you may experience in distress, in pangs of trouble, oppression, affliction. Who is our enemy? Now, when we look at that, let's go to the root of the word enemy, which is zarar, and it's Tsarar. Okay, and it means to bind up, tie up, be restricted, narrow, scant, cramped. In one form, it has this nuance almost of being bound and distress, hemmed in and confined, and you're in trouble. In other words, just as I said a moment ago, your enemies can be inside and outside. Sometimes our biggest enemy can be ourselves. And I've talked about that before, because we mess up our own lives by the things we do, by bowing down to temptations, by listening to other voices, by hanging around the wrong people. There are so many ways we become our own enemy. And the things that we fight within, those desires, those appetites, that flesh, that nefesh, that can be our enemy. Absolutely. So we have this idea of an enemy within and without in this word zarar, in the root word zarar. So think about freedom. I would say enemies try to control, to hem us in. Remember, I gave you that idea of bound up or tied up or restricted. Well, what's the opposite of that? That's freedom. Freedom from outside oppressors, freedom and liberty. But freedom from outside oppressors does not guarantee liberty, because liberty is a freedom that comes from the heart. Either you can be bound and distressed, or you can be free. Who is our liberty? Yeshua is our liberty. When Yah prepares a table that takes care of us, that satisfies us, what happens? He does it in the presence of those things that prevent our enjoyment of his nourishment. He does it in the presence of all of those things that seem to be binding us up, that are hemming us in, that are restricting us, so that we can have his nourishment. He doesn't ask us to help him. Why? Because if we are dealing with these enemies, and by the way, he is the one dealing with them, but we do what he says. But when those things are around, it's this distraction, and he doesn't even ask for the preparation. Remember, I said he does it in our faces, right in front of us, where he prepares that table. Because why? We have been bound or constrained, possibly. And he's given us this invitation. He says, hey, watch me work. I'm going to take care of all of this for you. I'm going to give you the provision that you need in exactly the time you need it. And when he invites us to sit and eat with him, he to display his power and his glory, his liberating power where it matters most, in the middle of our lives, in the circumstance that we need it at the moment we need it in. Our enemies are swallowed up because his table gives us his miracle power. It gives us liberty. It gives us redemption. He gives us that forgiveness. He gives us restoration. He gives us that shalom. And remember, shalom is much more than peace. It is well-being, nothing missing, nothing broken, fullness, wholeness, and completeness. He unties us. And when he does that, he sends the enemy away. Yeah. That's what Yah's table is, his amazing table. And we turn our lips and we praise him. We give him glory. We give him honor. We give him obedience. We follow his word. If you love me, you keep my commands. We learn how to be poured out. Maybe that poured out broken vessel, the broken bread. We learn how to sit at his table in the presence of our enemies, even when it does seem we're poured out. But now I want to turn this around a little bit. Maybe there is a second aspect. In fact, I don't think maybe, I think there is, to this table, because Yah he absolutely arranges and sets things in order and ordains it and gives us this feast of provision, and that's piled high, and we praise him and we give him honor and glory, even in the midst of trouble. But when we look at this, preparing a table in the presence of our enemies, maybe there's a secondary reason for that. Now, we've talked about one side, how our enemies are watching and he's taking care of us. He's gone to great pangs to make sure everything is right, that nothing can harm us. But maybe the table is set for a different reason. Maybe there's reconciliation at that table. Maybe it's a meeting place with our enemies. Before you get taken aback, let's look at this a little bit, because according to David, we don't have to fear our enemies when Yah's with us, right? Because he's prepared a table. Even if we're walking through this valley of the shadow of death, in this narrow place, we're not fearing the evil. That means we're not fearing our enemies or anything that they might threaten to do or anything like that, because we trust in him and his kingdom. Okay, that's a given. We've got that. We've got to remember that there's a shepherding motif here in the midst of this psalm, and sheep. We've got all that. We've been talking about it. But why do we think that the table just represents a banquet or a feast or even a meal? Because yes, it does. But is it more? Yes. Because Yah is the one that's preparing the table, and that shulchan, that let's break that word apart a little bit, okay? Now, we know that it is done in associating with our enemies. So let's look at that sheen, because it is spelled with a sheen, a lamed, a chet, and a nun. The first thing we look at is that sheen, which is that sh sound, and it can mean to consume or destroy. It can mean to press or to crush, sharp teeth, to tear something apart. What we look at next is that lamed, and that lamed has this idea of this voice of authority. It's this picture of a shepherd's staff, and it can represent something that leads you, but it can also, when necessary, it's something that prods or goads you. It even carries with it this idea of stinging or pricking. It can represent this teacher, what's the teacher? It's Yeshua, it's Messiah. It's also the Torah. So we've got that. So shulchan. Then we have that het, and that het is this idea of offense. of this something being fenced in to be taken care of, or something else being kept on the outside. It's a boundary depending on how you look at it. We've got the noon, which is life, which is the word, which is the seed. So we have this consuming fire that consumes and destroys, with a voice of authority that causes us to be fenced in, keeping the enemy at bay. And how? And what happens then? It brings forth life. It brings forth life. That's what it's like at his table. Simplified, you have consume and destroy to teach, the voice of authority, and fenced in life. When we're fenced in by him and his word, sitting at his table, there is life, and that more abundantly. That is shulchan. And then we look at that shalach one more time. It was a word used for moving, or for going, moving forward, for a resolution, maybe even a goal. Now that paints a secondary look at that shalach for moving towards a goal, moving forward. But what could that possibly have to do with a table? Let's look at a secondary word for table. The table that we often think of, that we sit at right now, is a piece of wood, a plank, which we got that. And sometimes the word tavalah is used for that kind of table in Hebrew. But shalah or shulchan is a different kind of table. If you have this idea of reaching a goal, a resolution of a problem, if you have a problem, then who might that problem be with? What does the table have to do with that? If you look at shalach as well, it to mean to shoot forth, to grow long, reach, and sow, and spread, and stretch forth. How do those words combine? How do those meanings combine? Well, in ancient times, in fact, we know this because if you ever had been to Pesach and had a seder during Pesach, then oftentimes we talk about reclining when we eat. Well, oftentimes in the days of old, in the ancient Near East, you didn't often sit at a table. Many times you were sitting reclining. That picture that we have of the disciples and Yeshua sitting at a table may not be quite what it was. But in that culture, sitting and reclining was the way you ate. You sat on the ground and you shared a common plate. Were tables used down there? Yes. But the idea that you weren't necessarily sitting at a table, we need to keep in mind, because they were used occasionally when feasting, but oftentimes you were sitting on the ground, just reclining and eating and enjoying each other's company. So let's take that picture, because we still have this idea that this table is reaching a goal, to a resolution of a problem. Now, why would we need to reach a goal, or why would we need resolution of a problem? Because we are dealing with an enemy. Now, Yah he does take care of us. And I believe he's proactive against our enemies. And there's this idea of a head being anointed. He anoints my head with oil. We're not there yet. But when a king had a feast, he oftentimes, for his invited guests, he would have oil and pour frankincense over their head, in part to get rid of the smell of the guests. I know that seems odd in this day and this hour, because we're so PC on everything. But there was a reason that the woman carried a bouquet of flowers as well in tradition. And that's not Hebrew tradition, but in tradition, the bouquet was carried to get away the smell. So a king pouring frankincense on his guests isn't too far-fetched when you based on that, because people didn't have today's hygiene or products. Now, there were natural ones they used, I'm sure, and that's great. But there were also other issues. So we have this idea, when he anoints their heads with oil, this king getting his guests ready to sit at his table. And we've got to remember that frankincense was considered the oil of kings, because not only did it cover up the smell, but it would also give this euphoric feeling when it was used. So, however, whatever it is, this feast was before an enemy, and that happened in Middle Eastern tradition. When one wanted to reconcile with an enemy, you would invite him to share a meal. So maybe this has a secondary meaning you're sitting down with your enemies. Now, how did that actually work? As if they're an enemy, how could you trust them? Well, it would involve a table where all the food and drinks were on display. Everything was out, so everybody could see it and know there were no shenanigans going on. They would the drinks would be there, the food would all be tasted by what they would have tasters. So if somebody fell dead, there was trouble about to break out because they knew something sinister was at hand. So you invited your enemy. You wanted to make sure that the other side wasn't about to kill you in a weak spot because you had let down your guard. And yet this table was still there because there was a hope of making resolution. So there would be a time where they would be sitting down to build up this trust relationship, to build, maybe have negotiations, to maybe open up their hearts or end the confusion, resolve whatever conflict that they were dealing with at the time. So maybe there is this picture here of David declaring that Yah is working to create this solution, the peaceful solution with the enemy, with the enemies. So to do the right thing and try to work out your differences before things got physical or got worse or went to war even. So maybe this table as a secondary look is about bringing restoration, conflict resolution. Because even today in the Middle East, conflicts are often taken care of or revolved around a meal or a table. So in this verse, there's this idea possibly that Yah has set this table for us in the presence of our enemies, and it's done so that there can be resolution and we can resolve our differences peacefully and talk them out, and if possible, become friends instead of enemies. That's a completely different way to look at it. Let's think about what's going on around us. Even in our congregations, there's people not talking to each other. In families, people aren't talking to each other. People hold grudges. Oh my goodness, grudges. People hold so many grudges, especially in our congregations. And you see split relationships, split congregations because of grudges and misunderstandings and really a lack of communication. And so here is this idea that a person that once was friend who's now an enemy can become a friend again because there's resolution brought forth at the table that Yah has prepared in the presence of our enemies. Some of the hardest conflicts to walk out are those conflicts that involve a friend. An enemy you expect to be an enemy, a stranger, but somebody who was a friend who has then become an enemy, that's heartbreaking because there was once something there. And Yah wants restoration. He wants restoration. So at this table, differences can be resolved. They can be arbitrated out, with prayer, with communication. What is the enemy's greatest tool? He wants to create division, disharmony. He wants people to carry offense around. He wants people to walk in that bondage so that they are restricted in that narrow place, which we talked about just a little bit ago. Yah wants those wounds healed because divided we fall and united we stand. There's got to be communication between his people, between the parties, so that healing can begin. Okay, so let's continue with this vein about our enemies and the possibility that, yes, this can mean a table where our enemies look on, and Yah's prepared us and prepared it for us to provide for us whatever we need, and the enemy's at bay. He can't touch us. We have complete trust and freedom. But here's this other side, that we sit down with those that are our enemies to bring forth resolution. Is it one or the other? I think it's both. So let's continue to look at it, because one more time, let's look at what it means to be before our enemies. The lapane, and it is rooted, one more time, about his presence, his face. So the word presence in Hebrew is neged, which means being the opposite, speaking up against someone or something. So the table that's being prepared is indicating that the presence of David, or the presence of the psalmist, is confronting is not only those who are threatening to invade his country, but also those who are opposing him and speaking against him. Guys, can you relate to that? Have you had these threats from outside that, yeah, they look good? We're dealing with governments and forces that are way beyond our control. But how often do we have those forces that are coming against us that are much closer to home, that are speaking ill things against us, untrue or distorted, where you never get to voice your side if you need to, or the truth as you see it, where there's no communication? So here again, we have these forces, opposite forces, that David is facing, more than just the enemy on the outside, the enemy that's much closer. Do we need a table? Probably. As a king, David would continually face opposition among his staff, among his counselors, among those just that are around him, his own sons. Yeah. In any relationship, whether it's a business relationship, whether it's a friendship, whether it's your husband, whether it's your wife, there's going to be difference of opinion in your own congregation, amongst the people. Maybe there's differences of opinion and beliefs, and it threatens to destroy relationship. Guys, we don't want those relationships destroyed. I'm thinking even now as a pastor, where I've seen people walk out because they've had a difference of opinion instead of talking it through, or instead of just being Hebrew. Because what is Hebrew? Hebrew means that we can look at an idea, a word, part of the Torah, and we might have a differing opinion, but our differences are on that thing. They're not with us. We're commanded to love our brother and love our sister and walk in grace and mercy. So if they fail, if they mess up, we're right there, and we're not walking out because we have a difference of opinion. And I think now, even at LOW, that I've seen just people leave because, well, I don't believe this way, or I see this differently, so I'm just leaving. And that's not what y'all wants. Tell me, do you believe exactly the same way as your brother or your sister, your mother or your father? No. Are you completely in lockstep with every teacher out there, every Hebrew roots teacher or other teachers? I guarantee you're not. And that's okay. And that's okay. And it can be for things other than that too. I mean, conflict comes with just a look sometimes, and it destroys relationships. So you have this enemy that's this national enemy, and you have an enemy that's closer, and you don't want them to be enemies. But unfortunately, those siblings, the marriages where couples hate each other, the siblings who hate each other, the business relationships that have been fractured, the enemy is the one out to destroy relationships. And oftentimes, instead of mending relationship or having communication, we fall right into his hands, in his work, and we separate ourselves, destroying the relationship or walking away from the relationship that we at once thought was from God. Why would we do that then? If we thought it was from God, when somebody says a word that we might disagree with, or maybe we took it wrong, why do we just walk away? Because we're playing into the enemy's hands. We're in the enemy's playground. Hate and offense are the enemy's playground. And one of the key reasons for relationship collapses here in this day and this hour is because two parties will not confront the issues, and they won't talk. Or maybe one party wants to talk, but the other wants nothing to do with it. Somebody doesn't want to seek resolution, or maybe nobody wants to seek resolution. And as a result, everything gets bigger. The differences that were once this big become so magnified and so exaggerated because the enemy lets them grow, because we dwell on them. We feed the beast, so to speak. We keep feeding it and feeding it. And so we become more and more alienated, and we start talking behind each other's back. We start ripping apart character, destroying a congregation, whispering negative things about each other. And then the enemy is winning. He's turning y'all's people against each other. It snowballs. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And there seems to be an outright war because nobody will speak to the other person. or one person's scared to speak to the other. And the longer it goes, the worse it gets. And the enemy declares a victory because he's completely destroyed a relationship. And it could have been resolved at the table, at his table, at Yah's table. It could have brought much more honor and joy to Yah to bring resolution at the table. And it happens in any kind of relationship that we experience. So this lack of willingness to communicate, the lack of willingness to resolve the issues at hand results in war, so to speak. And it's rooted in fear. Fear? Yeah. Fear of being proven wrong, fear of being made fun of, fear of loss of pride, fear that you might have made a mistake. Fear. And where's fear? Is fear from Yah? No. This is why Yah prepares this table. This is a secondary look of what this table is for, because sometimes it takes him or a third party to bring these two opposite sides together. And they've got to come together and face each other personally in his presence. Yeah. You can do it through writing or a letter, but the best way to solve a conflict, to bring forth resolution, is face to face. Don't text each other. Don't email each other. That's great and that's fine, and that can be a beginning. But the best way to take care of things is face to face, voice to voice. And what does it take? It takes courage. It takes strength. It takes humility. And it takes a big person to come in and say, hey, let's talk about this. Could you be rejected? Yes. Might it not work? It might not work. But at least you did it Yah's way. Remember, the word says if you have aught against your brother, you drop what you're doing right there at the altar and you go take care of it. You go take care of it. You resolve. You bring forth resolution, or at least attempt to do it. Now, am I saying things you may not know? Well, it's pretty logical. We talk about conflict resolution. We talk about it all the time. But to think that this table, an aspect of this table, could be about bringing forth restoration in this family, in your family, in our family, is a pretty important thing. And it's a thing that's needed in this day and this hour where we come together, each facing each other personally within his presence. In his presence. It's so important. And it's hard sometimes. Sometimes it actually seems easier to ignore the problem and put off the confrontation. I don't like confrontation. It doesn't matter if we don't like confrontation. When we're dealing with people, there's going to be confrontation, and there's going to be interaction, and there's going to be push and pull, and there's going to be times where our feathers get ruffled, but we choose not to be offended and walk away. We say, hey, is this what you meant when you said this? But most of us all the time, well, I can't believe she or he said that. I just don't disagree. Or why didn't they write me back? Why didn't they call? Why? You name it. The enemy's going to use it to try to destroy relationships. So we need a table. And it takes an act of God to prepare the table before us in the presence of our enemies, or a table in the presence of our accusers. Ouch. That one too. Think about that. Because right here, David's saying that he's too fearful to bring this confrontation about, or he just doesn't have the ability to bring his presence before his enemies because he's in over his head. Are you in over your head? Does it seem like it's an impossible situation? Here, David has to say, hey, Father, you're my only hope. That's it. Yahweh, you're the only one that can bring forth this resolution. Bring us together so that we can have that shalom. So we've got to ask ourselves these questions. Who are we in conflict with? Are you in conflict with a family member, with a boss, with a coworker, with somebody in the congregation, with somebody in a neighboring congregation, with an associate, with a neighbor, with a son or a daughter or a mother or a father? Is there a willingness or an unwillingness to take resolution to it? Maybe you feel you're in over your head and this is impossible. Conflict resolution is completely impossible. Well, you need to never forget that Yah wants restoration. And the big person just swallows their pride and says, hey, let's sit down and talk. But you make sure Yah is in the midst of it, because you give that time to him. There's no shame in going to him and pleading with him to prepare a table. None whatsoever. Prepare a table, Father, in the presence of my enemy, so that we will no longer be enemies, but once again friends, once again co-workers, once again family, once again unity instead of division. I want us all to really think about those areas in our life. Is there someone or something that we need some restoration with? Because that's what builds the kingdom.
And no, but what you did say is, and this is something that we do say at Life of Worship, and the people, how do I say this nicely, is that, we hear about these, just let me put it this way. We always hear about 2 Jews, 3 opinions. We hear about them looking and you brought this up, you're talking about the object on the table, the subject on the table. But the thing is, you can discuss it from all different angles, but because we are all brothers, we're all together as family, we can get up from that table, even if we haven't resolved anything, or even if we've come up with a 3rd opinion or a 4th opinion, but we can still get up and hug and walk away. And that should not put a wedge between us. The same thing is every congregation has a different way that to have their service, their worship service. I mean, it varies, the whole spectrum of it. But if someone comes in and says, I really like this place, but now that I've been here for a couple months, I think you should do this different, and you should do this different, and you should do this different, and or I'm not going to come back. I mean, I think those are different issues that we shouldn't even bring up. We should be happy we have the opportunity to fellowship. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Is we don't that we have a family to gather with, that we don't have to go start our own group because there was something else going on. When the Father is working within us, maybe some agitation that's going on needs to be worked out, because the Father is polishing you. He doesn't want that relationship or the relationships interrupted. He wants to just polish you and get some of those rough edges off, some things that he's wanting to change within us. So a lot of times that person we're sitting with at the table is not the enemy.
Right.
And maybe the enemy is within.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yep.
Yeah.
I Joe said something really good here that would be a whole nother way to look at this. She said, could it be a table to bring forth peace between you and the enemy? Or could it be a table filled with the weapons he has for us to use? Because what do we use? Our fight is not carnal, but it's filled with his weapons. We put on his armor. We use what he's called us to use. So that's another great way to look at it, Joe. Absolutely. It's really good.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. I like it. It's a spread of the weapons that'll defeat your enemies. I like that.
All right. Okay. Well, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. We'll continue on next week. Or actually, Mr. Craig is going to be bringing the teaching next week. So we're going to take a break from this teaching for 1 week. We're still here, but he's bringing something from his heart next week. So, and then we'll continue with Psalm the following week. So
all I want to say is, so come back next week. We're going to have a great time. Also, stay tuned next here on lambnetwork.tv, where we have the Craig Report coming up next. And I've got some thoughts for this evening. So I want to hear your thoughts in the chat room, but also just some things about where we are and what's going on around us, because it's getting crazy out there. So we'll see you on the other side here shortly.